All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been beginning to go over the Getting Started with ASP.NET MVC from Microsoft.com. Previously, I went over the first lesson of 11, Getting Started, and now I'm in lesson 2, Adding a Controller. So, some of this will be review. So what? MVC stands for Model View Controller. It's a pattern for developing applications. Models, the M is for model, and they are, as it says, classes that represent the data of the application. They also use validation logic, so they use code to enforce business rules. We've talked about business rules. That's what makes the business work. If I go out and buy something from Amazon, I'm going to have to either give them a credit card or PayPal or something, unless they're offering their stuff for free, and I've never seen that before from Amazon. So the models, again, are the classes that represent the data and the validation logic used to enforce any associated business rules that go with that data. The view are typically HTML. They're the HTML response that gets returned from the controller. And the controller, again, handles the incoming browser requests. It retrieves the data, which we've talked about before. And then it basically, what it does is it ferrets out, or it says, hey, this model, do your thing. It does its thing, it sends it back. And ideally then it's going to call and say, hey, you view, you do your thing. All right? So the author says here we'll be covering all of these concepts in this series and show you how to use them. I already showed you this, but in the previous step in the Getting Started, since we chose the MVC template, it created a home, an account, and a manage controller. So a home controller, all right, it created a manage controller, and it created an account controller by default. So it says, let's begin by creating our own controller. So we want to right mouse click on the controller class in the Solution Explorer, choose Add and Controller. Again, I'm being as deliberate with this stuff as I can possibly be. I'm right mouse clicking. Let's close the controllers for now. I'm going to, well, we notice we've got our 3. We'll leave it open. Right mouse click, Add Controller. All right? And it brings up an associated dialog box. I'm just going to keep popping back and forth between the actual article that's online and what I'm doing. My goal is to make sure that no one, meaning no one, gets lost in this. All right? So, in the Add Scaffold dialog box, notice Add Scaffold. So in this dialog box right here, click MVC5 controller empty and then add. So we're going to add literally an empty controller. All right? Well, that's it right there. So we're going to do that and click add in a minute. But what else is here? It says here, this will give you an empty controller. Okay. It says this will provide an MVC controller that has CRUD capability. Create, read, update, and delete, and even listing capabilities. Here is an MVC controller with actions and eraser views to do CRUD. Here is an API, a web API or application program interface empty controller. Here is an API, web API controller with REST actions to create, read, update, delete, and list entities, all right, using a REST application. We're not going to get into that. Here's another one, a web API controller with, again, CRUD actions and list. This is another one. And yet another one. The only 2 that I believe, or maybe 3 that we'll use in here, are empty or read write or entity framework. For now, we are asked to choose the empty one and click add. Now, one thing to please realize about this, always make sure, notice how it's highlighted. We're going to call this thing right here Hello World Controller. So I'm going to type in here Hello World Controller. But that said, before we go through here, always keep the word controller on the end with a capital C. Don't remove it. The system basically expects things to be named in a certain way. All right? Now notice when we've got these three controllers. All right? And in our views, we've got 1, 2, 3 controllers, and we've got an account view, we've got a home view, we've got a manage view, and a shared view that everybody's able to use if they want to. But notice when I do this and I click add, what happens? It's thinking about it. Watch how my controllers will be changed in just a minute. And boom, there's our new Hello World controller. And, well, there's nothing under models, but we now have a Hello World folder for a view that goes along with it. So we just looked in the Solution Explorer and you saw that a new controller was created. It's a CS or C# file, and it's called Hello World Controller. These are put in alphabetic order, all right? And we also had a new views folder created that's called Hello World. Right now, for lack of better words, this home Hello World controller is almost empty. There is not very much in it. We're going to change that right now. All right? Instead of having an action result that's returned in here, we're going to return a string. Okay? And what string is that, Jeff? We're going to just return a string that just says, this is my default action. All right. Notice I spelled a few things wrong there. So, when we run this, that's what should come up. This is my default action, and the word default should be bolded. Notice that inside of here, we are in a C# program, but it's recognizing our HTML tags. Then we're going to come in and we're going to add another method. And this is going to say get hello world welcome is going to be its name. All right. This will say public, a string also, and it's called welcome. And this will return a string that says, this is the welcome action method. Now, let's take a second to go over this. First, you'll notice that both of these are public methods inside of a public class. Public, you've learned this in other courses, means that it can be called from both inside the class and outside of the class. All right. This index is going to be our default method. It returns a string. Nothing new there. Need a semicolon at the end here. This is going to be a welcome. And again, nothing new there. It returns a string. So both of these controller methods return strings. The controller is named Hello World Controller, and it has an index method, and it has a welcome method. All right? So let's do a file, save all, and I want to do this. This has nothing to do with what you guys are doing, but I am taping these. So I'm going to delete this and delete this. This is the last one that I was creating. Okay? So we're going to run this right now. So I'm going to click the Save All button and tell it to run. It's going to look exactly like it did before. Exactly. The reason it's going to look exactly as it did before is it is being told by default to run the home controller's index method, which gave us this. You saw this before. But we're going to change this, and at the end, we're going to put in here slash. We'll do it twice. The first time, we'll say here slash hello world. All right. Hit enter. Notice this is my default action. I don't have to tell you where we got that from. We got that from right here. So we told it that from the hello world controller, that was the slash hello world, we told it to run the default action. So this is what we got. We could have also said, if we wanted to there, slash index, and it would run it that way as well. But since we left the slash index off, by default, it runs the default method that, unless you change it, is index. And what's the other method that we wrote in here? We wrote a method called welcome. So let's come back here and let's put in hello world slash welcome and hit enter. This is the welcome action method. All we told the system to do here was to return some HTML. And the system was happy enough to do exactly what we told it to do. All right? So ASP.NET Model View Controller will invoke different controller classes and hence different methods within them depending on the URL. So remember, if I go back and remove that hello world and hit enter, it's running the home controller's index method. But if I, and again, I could just put in here slash index and boom. I think it needs to be a lowercase. It might need the home there. Probably does. That's probably what it is. Slash home slash index. There it is. But we told it to circumvent that, and we told it to go and do hello world, which ran that. There we can put, if we want, slash index on the end, and it looks the same. You also saw when we said here, welcome, boom. Okay? The default URL is basically what gets defined. Let's close this and let's go back. And I should be doing a better job. So there was the hello world controller that we created. All right, we put in that code. We went back and we ran this, but we put slash hello world, which ran our index methods code, which said this is my default action, where the word default was bolded. Then we ran it again, all right, and we put in slash hello world welcome, and it's not showing in here, but we put that one in. All right, now we want to go into our app starts route config file right now. We want to go into our app start route config. And if you say, I don't know what that is, this is what the class is about. There's app start and there's route config. This is telling us right here the default URL routing logic that's used by ASP.NET Model View Controller. So it's saying when you come in, the controller that I want you to call by default is the home controller. So, by default, I want you to call that one. All right? And I want you to call its index method, which is that one. And we don't have any parameters, but it would be possible for us to add an optional ID if we wanted to. All right? Again, I'm not saying, hey, does that totally make sense? It may not. As we go through this stuff in more and more detail, hopefully it'll make more and more sense. This stuff will all be out ideally on the system by the beginning of June 2018. So all of this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and do the same thing again in the classroom throughout the first week or week and a half of class. All right. So if we run the application and we don't supply anything, it gives us the default stuff. All right. As already mentioned, the first part shows you what controller class to call. In other words, the home controller. The second part says which method in that controller should you call, and this says the index. And the last part, notice again it says optional. It's for route data. We talk about a little bit later. All right. So I showed you how to run that. And you saw now, as we went through all this stuff, this is the welcome action method. So you saw all that stuff. So the next thing we're told to do in here is it says, let's modify the example slightly so we can pass a parameter in. So we are asked to go in and change our welcome method so it looks like this. I'm just going to copy it. I guess I'm a little lazy today. But I'm going to jump back here. I'm going to go in my Hello World controller to my welcome method, and I'm just going to paste that in. Now, let's look at what is in here. Well, that was interesting. Oh, I want to remove that line now. Sorry. Come on. That's because I didn't remove what was here. I just pasted. All right, let's move all this over. There. All right. Now, I'm getting an error. Why? Because it's looking for name and it's looking for num times, and I'm not providing it here. All right, I'm also getting an error because somehow I removed a curly brace. So I don't need that curly brace or that curly brace. There we go. And this will all be fixed in just a minute. All right. So what we want is we want this line right here to replace this line right here. Now, when I first started doing this, I thought, you know, I'll keep the old one, just comment it out. But when you do that, you start to get code bloat, where you've got actually too much information showing there. So what's different in here? Well, we now can pass in a name, and we can pass in a number of times. So I can sit there and say, when I say hello, I can pass my name in there, and it'll say, hello, Jeff. All right? So if I run this, and I put in for my name, I put in Jeff, and I put in a number of times, all right, it's going to look a little bit different. What do I mean? The easiest way, again, is to show you. Did you notice when I had this stuff in here, how it gave me all these underlines and it gave me errors over here? All right, I can always click on one of those errors and go down to my window down here. Sooner or later, it'll show me what those errors are, or I can just run the program. And I'll get those errors. But I just want to Control X, Control V. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run the program again. It's going to look exactly the same when we do the run. Why? Because, again, it's going back to the home controller here, and it's running the index method. All right? Notice now, if I go back and I go to Hello World, it's again running my default, my index. But if I go to Hello World, welcome, notice I didn't get any errors. Why didn't I get any errors? Well, let's take a look back at our code. All right. First of all, we've got a default value here that says num times equal 1. So that's where we got the 1 from when we actually ran this. Right there, num times is 1. All right. But we didn't get anything in for the name. Well, by default, what C# does is we've got that name variable. Since we didn't initialize it, it gets initialized to the empty string. All right. So it works, just doesn't show us very much. The other thing to notice is this particular thing here uses the HTTP server utility.html encode. All right. And that's done to try to protect it so that if you put garbage in and you try to put in something that would inflict harm on the server, it won't allow that to happen. If you want to hear more on that or read more on that, go down and read what they have right here. Now they tell us to go in here and run this and put hello world, welcome question mark on. I'll just grab what they have. All right. So I'm going to come back to my run, which is here. And after welcome slash question mark, name equals Scott and num times equal 4. Hit enter. Hello Scott, num times equal 4. Well, I'd rather have my first name in there than my last name, so I'm going to change that to Jeff. In fact, I think it'll even take Jeff Scott. Hello Jeff Scott, num times is 4. If I don't like 4, I can put in 771, and boom, it changes. As they mention on page 9 of the handout, what I just did was I went in and I tried to put in a few other values. All right, the author says that. I guess that's up here. There's hyperlinks up the wazoo in this thing. So if you want to know about the MVC model binding system, boom, you can take a look over there. All right. We did not use parameters in there. All right. Why? The name and the num times were passed in as query strings. That meant they come in after the question mark. All right. So they want us to replace what we had previously with this. And although I don't want to induce or show or put too much code bloat into the system, what I am going to do is I am going to take, and whoops, I got to stop the run, and I'm going to comment all of this out. All right, and I am going to put this in. So what's different in here is we're using that keyword there, ID. All right. Now when we run this, we're going to put hard code and ID in there, but then the question mark for the query string, and then the name. So it'll have to look a little bit different. When we ran this previously, it looked like this. Hello, Jeff Scott, num times is 771. Well, let's run it again. All right, so I'm going to save this, and let's run it again, But you'll notice that when we do this, we're going to have to make a little bit of a change. All right? Remember, this is still going to start by running the index method of the home controller. All right, so we'll let that come up. There it is. And here, if we type in hello world, it still shows us the default action. But now what we want under hello world is we want welcome. All right, we want welcome, but we want to put in here, make sure I'm typing it in the correct manner. So, hello world, welcome. Now a number, so that was 771 we had before. That is not part of the query string. That's a parameter. Now is the query string where name equals Jeff. And hit enter. There you go. Hello Jeff. And it shows us ID. So the output is not the same because previously when we printed it out, we said num times. We're not using a num times anymore. All right, we're using an ID field. So this time we used the route parameter ID. So that ID that you see right there that we passed in, that ID corresponds, stop the run here, that corresponds under our route config to that ID that you see right there in the blue. As they mention on the top of page 11 on our handout here, the author says right here, in MVC applications, it's more typical to pass in parameters as route data, like with the ID, than it is to pass them as query strings. You could also add a route to pass both the name and the num times in if we wanted to. Now we are asked then to go back into our route config and change these two things. So I'm just going to, again, I'm just going to grab this information that's right here, copy it to the clipboard, go back to my code, come into here, go into my map route right there, paste that in. All right. Okay, so again, I'm just trying what's shown in our handout. I'm going to save this and run it. Once this comes up, looks the same. I'm going to again browse over to Hello World. Welcome. And this time I'm going to put in here Jeff 771. All right, you'll notice that it's put in there literally as two different parameters. Hit enter. There you got just what we had before. They mention on the bottom of page 11 on this handout, which I'm going to go back to right now, sorry. The author says, for many MVC applications, the default route works fine. You will learn later in this tutorial to pass data using the model binder, and you won't have to modify the default route for that. All right. Now, a key thing to realize is the end of this handout, which is right here. So far, the controller has been doing virtually everything. So the controller has been doing the view controller part, the V and the C of MVC. So it's been doing the work of both the view and the controller. As it says, the controller is returning HTML directly. Ordinarily, you don't want that. If you remember from an earlier video presentation, we talked about one of the strengths, one of the highlights of Model View Controller is the separation of the model layer from the view layer from the controller layer. All right? As it says, if we don't do that, it can become cumbersome to code. Rather, typically we'll use a separate view template. It says, let's look next at how to do this. That is going to be the third presentation that I'm going to come back and go over with you shortly.